Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of Uncovering the Corners of the World podcast. I'm your host, Karina Kasmala. Each week, using research and in some cases using personal experiences where I actually traveled to these locations, I'll be explaining some of the hidden gems in the US and around the world. Last week, we traveled to Maryland, running alongside the Astighi horses on Astighi Island. And then we wandered into a corn maze at Lawyers Winterbrook Farms in Thurmont, Maryland. This week, we are continuing our journey through Maryland. Maryland's capital city, Annapolis, is known for the sailing capital of the world, according to the 50 States Maryland Facts and Trivia website. Annapolis in 1783 was considered the capital of the United States. Maryland is home to the National Aquarium in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. There are 47 state parks in Maryland, while Maryland's forests cover 2.7 million acres of land. Picture this. It's a nice warm day out, and you take your canoe out to Mallows Bay Park, to Mallows Bay. While paddling along Mallows Bay, you dodge wooden branches sticking out of the water, until you spot, several feet away, what looks like ruins of a large wooden structure that perhaps, at one point in time, was a ship. That wooden structure is part of the 220 abandoned steamships and vessels, also known as the Ghost Fleets, as mentioned by the Visit Maryland Mallows Bay Park website. Mallows Bay, or specifically Mallows Bay Park, is located in Nanjemoy in Charles County, Maryland. These abandoned ships are dated back to the Civil War, World War I, and date back even further as 12,000 years old, lying on the Potomac River in Charles County, Maryland. These ships are part of the first National Marine Sanctuary in Maryland, created by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the NOAA, is mentioned by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources website. The ships that sit on the Mallows Bay include a 4-masted schooner, a steel-hulled ferry, a log canoe, and fishing boats, as mentioned by the Capital Gazette article, Day Trippers, the Ghost Fleet of Mallows Bay. Specifically, the ships that were identified include the Yawa, a ship that made at least one trip to Italy in 1919 before it was moved to the Potomac River, where today it is almost underwater but can be seen at a low tide. There's also the Bayou Teche, a ship that traveled to Havana, Cuba, Galveston, Texas, and Bordeaux, France. The Mallows Bay Park also has other attractions like fishing, hiking, and bird watching, where you can see bald eagles, heron, osprey, waterfowl, and other animals. For our next attraction, we're still in Thurmont, Maryland, as we walk through a village that took part in the Industrial Revolution. Located at 12610 Catoctin Furnace Road, Thurmont, Maryland, or inside the Cunningham Falls State Park at the end of Catoctin Mountain, is Catoctin Furnace, where iron was produced from 1776 until 1903. In the 1730s, the settlers traveled to the Monocacy River Valley, according to the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society website. While they originally were focused on agriculture, they discovered Hamite ore. The Catoctin Furnace was built by James, Baker, Roger, and Thomas Johnson, and the furnace produced pig iron along with tools and other items like the Catoctin stove, 10-plate stove, and the Franklin stove, as mentioned by the National Park Service website on Catoctin Mountain. Later on, the furnace produced ammunition like cannons and cannonballs that were used by the Continental Army at the end of the Revolutionary War. The Catoctin Furnace originally was fueled by charcoal, and then it was converted to coal. Inside the village, there were also a charcoal house, a casting house, a foundry where the metal was melted, forge, stables, wagon sheds, sawmill, store, and a church along with homes for the workers. Johnson hired over 80 slaves, and these men worked as blacksmiths, coal miners or colliers, founders and forgemen that were either responsible for controlling the furnace, digging out the iron ore and coal, or forming the hot iron into stoves and other items. They also worked in the vineyards and other agricultural work in the farms near the furnace, or they also worked as servants for the iron masters. Later in the 19th century, European immigrant workers were hired and lived in the area because they were cheaper, according to the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society website. During this time, a new furnace was added by the name of Isabella that used steam-powered machinery and stood 33 feet high. Today, the Catoctin Furnace is the main attraction in the village. However, there are also stone and log houses nearby where the company workers lived, a graveyard, and a Gregorian mansion named Auburn that's at the end of the village. As for Cunningham Falls State Park, the official address is 14039 Catoctin Hollow Road, Thurmont, Maryland. Cunningham Falls State Park is known for its 78-foot waterfall in the 43-acre lake. At the park, you can swim, fish, boat, or camp. There are also trails, ones that are easy to short, to ones that are steep and rocky. And these trails can lead to the Catoctin Furnace or other scenic views. The park is also home to black bears and 2 venomous snakes, the northern copperhead and the timber rattlesnake. For our last attraction, we are visiting the original Awakening statue. If you remember on an earlier episode, episode 13, Missouri, a European-style castle, telephones, and awakening a giant, I talked about the 72-foot statue called Awakening. If you haven't listened to episode 13, I recommend to go check it out after this one. The original aluminum Awakening statue, which looks like a giant bearded man crawling out from under the ground, with one hand clawing at the sky while the other hand is barely seen. The giant bearded man also has one knee bent while the other is completely hidden except for toes pointed at the sky, is located at 153 National Plaza, Oxon Hill, Maryland, on a beach. The statue sold for $740,000 from the Sculpture Foundation to be placed at the beach near the Potomac River. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts and tune in next week as we explore more hidden attractions in the U.S. and around the world.